As I come over here, there's a chair here. Okay, hello everyone. My name's Joe Wright. I'm an Agile development coach, and I operate mainly across Scotland, currently with Registers of Scotland in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And I'm here to tell you about creating environments for collaborative knowledge workers. I've been given an opportunity a few times to shape the space that I work in with my teams, and ever since then I've had an interest in, well, what makes something work a bit better, even in the same space. And ever since then, I've generally been annoyed with everywhere else I worked, and I would like to share that gift of annoyance with you, so you may see the world through my eyes. In this talk, we're going to look at three things: the past, the present, and the future. How did we get to this point where we work how we do? How's that going for us? And then finally, what's some things other companies are doing which I think can make it a lot better place to work? But first of all, let's look to see what the Agile forefathers had to say about environments. So the fifth principle of the Agile Manifesto is all about build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need and trust to get the job done. Now, I think they've cheated there. I think there's about 3 principles in there, and they've just been really cheeky with this one. But that bit in the middle is about the environment. Give them the space that allows them to work best. So that's the link we have there. And currently, over 70% of software teams work in an open plan office, right? And so let's discover, how did we get to the point where we started working like this? So this here is the first office in the world, as far as I know of. All my history comes from Western books, so it's probably false, but it's the first office in the world. And this is the old Admiralty building in London, which was made in 1726. The empire was booming, and we basically needed somewhere to do all the paperwork. So the Admiral said, I want a place with meeting rooms, a boardroom, and lots of other offices for clerks to do their work. And it's still in use today. And this experiment was hugely successful. And all across London over the next 3 years, rather than having separate offices, people were building these custom buildings designed to make their work better. 100 years later, the government did a report on what works really well in offices. So Charles Trevelyan, in 1854, started pointing out some things that work well and some things that work differently. And one of the things they found was that for intellectual work, where you need to use your head, it works better to be in separate rooms to save from being interrupted. They also pointed out, but also mechanical work, where you're basically just doing the same operation over and over again, that's better done in a big room so the supervisors can make sure they're doing things correctly. 2 years later than this, Agile's favorite bad guy, can you think of who that might be? Yes, Frederick Winslow Taylor was born. Thanks very much. And then he came up with this scientific method of management, which was all about measuring. How can you make things faster? How you find the person that does it best, and you get everyone else to work the same way. And this meant it was all about efficiency. So the officers that we ended up having by 50 years later were very much like this. Let's get very regimented and keep everyone together working like this. And for a long time, this is how people worked, right next to the factories in something like this. But thankfully, technology came along and gave us an out. So there's a few technologies that totally changed things. One of them was air conditioning. The other one was electric lighting. But also the telegram was very important, because previously offices had to be next to the factories. There was no other way to communicate very quickly with them. So having the telegram meant we made offices away from the factories all of a sudden. The other 2 big inventions were steel. We could build buildings really high now. And more helpfully, we have lifts, so we can go up them quite easily. And this then poses us with this problem here. We've now got loads of space. What are we going to do with it? And this is when the golden age of office design came around. Lots of research was poured into how do we make this work well. And one of the biggest proponents of this was an American architect called Frank Lloyd Wright, who always had big open spaces in any of his buildings, and he was really interested in seeing how you can get open plan to work in an office. I've got a video here of him explaining why he thinks this is a good way of working.
But the box was a fascist symbol, and the architecture of freedom, of democracy, needed something beside the box. So I started out to destroy the box as a building.
Yes, because boxes are fascist. That was the reasoning we had for trying to move away from them into bigger spaces. And obviously, this is like 70 years before Godwin's law came around saying you can't just say something's fascist, therefore to win an argument. But that didn't exist, so he got his way. He also then went on to, in 1939, to build his masterpiece, which is the Johnson's Wax building in Wisconsin. So what he's done here is he's tried to put 200 different sales staff together from Johnson & Johnson into one big open space. And there's lots of really nice touches on this. Before he did this, he went to where they currently work, saw how they work, saw how they communicate, and then tried to make a system really good for that. You can see like natural light plays a big part. The ceiling has Pyrex and the light can flash down. The pillars there are a dendriform, which means tree-like. It's trying to make it look like a forest. And you can even see at these desks, one person has 3 desks around them. They're given lots of space to work in. And this was really the first prototype of this is how you do an open plan office. The problem was that other people then had to try to copy this. And rather than putting that much effort into it, we found out the best thing to do really is find out the way to do the cheapest way possible. So then we ended up with these things, right? So we have rows of regimented desks where everyone could be seen. There's still managers' offices off to the side of these, but this is how we started doing work. And this had its problems. And as he said, originally, boxes were fascist. It's very interesting that the reaction to this came from Germany, where they created a movement called Bürolandschaft, which means office landscape, right? At this point, Germany's trying to move on. They're trying to become much more of a social democracy. And they decided they wanted their office spaces to also be like this. So if you can see in the background, this is an example of one of the early ones here. What they've done is they've actually, they've put people together in teams. And they've given us some natural barriers of like partitions and plants. One of the great innovations of this time was carpet on the floor as well. But also the managers also sat with the rest of the workers. There wasn't any separate offices anymore. Everyone was sitting together, which could then create some debate and move things on. So here's an example of one of the offices in Hamburg, one of the first ones. And this is the plan. And again, they looked at how they currently communicate before this, and then how they like to do their work. And then they've built like these teams into different areas. And it might look higgledy-piggledy if you don't know what's going on. But really, these are the big teams that need to communicate together. Yeah? And some of these have different desks, and some of these have like single desks over here, because the tasks they're doing in that area is different. Another innovation here was the break room. Before that, that's a waste of space, a break room. Instead, you had a little trolley that went around called the Crystal Palace, which would come around at certain times and give you a coffee. But instead, now we had a break room, a place where we can relax and chew the fat. And actually and one of the examples of a building at the time, well, I might change this after this, is the Scandinavian Airlines in Stockholm, which also used Bürolandschaft. And they also added the idea of a street in the middle, right? So this is from the 1960s. And they put a street in it so you can create a place to congregate, which obviously is extremely different from the let's stack them high mentality that was dominant. But of course, also, we have that here as well, as you can see. As I came into this building for the first time, you've got a street going down it, right? So the only problem now is that now this had taken over in Northern Europe, started in Northern Germany, but spread across Scandinavia, and actually got into the UK in some places as well. The only problem it had now was to try and crack America. So in America, Herman Miller was Robert Frost was the head of research at Herman Miller, which was an office firm which you could ask to fit out your offices. And they took a keen interest in Bürolandschaft and tried to find out how's a way we can do that over here in America. And they did the same thing. They did very similar research, And they found that people sit all day, and that isn't healthy. They wanted to do something about this. And most people seem to need to do work which is both private and also collaborative. And they came up with what is called the Action Office, which is what you see here. And if you want to get an Action Office, Herman Miller would first come in, see how you communicate, and then create it for you. So you can see there's little spaces here where you can have a meeting, but also there's places to do work when you need it. And they came up with some principles for their offices. So you need to have flexible ingredients. So it's modular furniture, stuff you can take apart and put back again for when the needs change. They also had height adjustable tables, right? Which I know came back in vogue about 10 years ago, but they had them here. So they had tables you could go up and down. They were really, really obsessed with blood flow and how they can optimize for that, because they figured blood flow equals healthy, and that's a good thing. But also they had dedicated, they insisted on having dedicated areas of focus and also the ability to generally see around you. But there's other things happening at this time. So this is like the late 60s, I think, nearly coming to the 70s. So we've got the Action Office, but there was another demographic changing. Offices were becoming very different, where the other half of society suddenly started going to work as well. And this meant in open offices, there was a general, like, is it okay to be seen out there? And the Observer ran this article after Boots opened its headquarters in Nottingham saying, would you let your daughter work in open plan? And this is full of great little stories on this one. People complaining that I can't fix the temperature, it's a bit noisy, I get distracted. But there's a bit in the middle here where the head lady says, it's good because all the ladies are dressed up nice now. But yeah, so there was a bit like, how can you get more modesty and privacy? And the Action Office was offering a better solution at that time. So what they did also find was noise was a factor, so they started building them higher up and higher. And then at this point, Herman Miller had very much established that, okay, Action Offices, you can do them. And people were like, but they couldn't, like, you know, scale to everywhere in America that wanted one. So they decided to make a catalog of all their stuff. Here's all the things you can buy from Herman Miller and create your own Action Office, right? So this meant now you didn't have to study, you could just buy. So what do you think happened after people were given the option of what to put in their office? Yes. They bought the cheapest thing, which was the wall and the table, and went, yes, Action Office, done. And again, this went kind of wrong, and it was too noisy, so we scaled them up again to make bigger ones into like seas of cubicles, which you could only find someone if you're 7 foot tall, like this gentleman here, so you could see down. And there was some good bits, I've read some good bits about this, and people were like, I don't really like it, it's not very nice. And then they decided the best way to fix this was to let them choose the color of their cube. And interestingly, this tried to go back to Germany, and they rebelled. They were like, what is this? This is not social democracy anymore. And the government had to pass a law saying any German worker must have access to natural light and have at least 20 foot square of workspace. So you don't see these things in Germany, even to today. And Germans currently enjoy the largest per person area to work in. In Europe, Bulgaria has the least. So they made a pretty good choice there. But you will see very different, that also killed Bureau Landschaft off as well, because now the Germans had entirely different buildings they had to build, so it couldn't do as much open plan stuff. Right. But of course, the inventor of the Action Office wasn't particularly happy with this development, right? They'd done lots of studies, worked out ways of getting to work on your own and collaboratively. And people had basically done this. You gave them the catalog, and this happened. Well, not happy. And but the horse had bolted at this point. There's nothing you could do about it. But he had some pretty choice words for the creators of these environments. So he started off by saying, the cubicizing of people in modern corporation is monolithic insanity. And he reserved particular words for the designers of these spaces by saying, not all organizations are intelligent. Lots are run by crass people who can take the same kind of equipment and create hellholes. They make little bitty cubicles and stuff people in them. Barren, rat hole places. He might have been a bit annoyed. Cool. But like before, technology came to save the day again. In the 90s and further on, we changed how we work. we didn't need as much space, right? We didn't need all the paper to be near different types of equipment. We have one tool, and it's, the laptop and the latte. And we can do that all over the place. You can work in a cafe. This, with Wi-Fi, wires weren't a thing. And it really changed the dynamic. And cubes were pretty much loathed anyway, but this certainly was a thing that killed them off. Another thing that came in around this time is hot desking. Does anyone know where hot desking came from? Hell. Close. Submarines. 200 feet below, nearer hell. Yeah. So in submarines, they have multiple crews, right? It's ones that work, so it's a 24-hour operation, a submarine. It will crash into something otherwise, I imagine. But they don't need to have beds for everyone, right? So they have half the number of beds per personnel, right? And then so people with one shift will sleep, then the other one gets to go sleep in it. But the bed would still be warm, thus hot bedding, which we then changed into hot desking for our own organizations. And there's been some other inventions that I think pretty good, actually. So this is the Fender office. I don't think you need that many guitars otherwise. But yeah, we've added like living room aesthetic, a bit of the house into our office, probably to make us want to stay there for longer. But it's another design trend that's going on. And another one is biophilic design, which means taking nature in. So you'll see like more moss walls. Anyone seen a moss wall? We've got one where I am. It helps with the humidity or breathing or something. But, apparently this calms us. That's pretty cool. I'd like to work there. But this is another trend that's happening just now. Apparently it makes you more creative and less stressed. But generally the pattern we keep seeing is someone makes something using a lot of thought and looking at how humans are using it, and then someone figures out how to make it really cheap. And again, with the Action Office, we thought about how to do something, and so we ended up with something the original inventors never intended. And here's a picture of an example of an office that just opened in London. They were very happy with this office. And I think this is sort of how we do things now, right? They have the nice living rooms and so on, and the meeting rooms, which are like, funky. But, this is where the work's happening. It's a huge hot desking area. And we keep doing this. We keep adding some nice things onto usually a big pool of desks. And the question I've always thought was, why? Why do we work this way? Is this the best way? I suspected not, but I just had my ability to whinge. I didn't have any other credible evidence. So I looked up the top 5 reasons for doing open offices. And the first one is it improves communication. It improves collaboration. Equality is there. It improves your health, and it's low cost. So I thought, OK, let's take them and check. Let's see what evidence do we have. If you ask someone why they're doing open office, they'll usually give you a combination of these items. So communication, right? So communication is people speaking to each other. And the general idea is if you're sitting near people, there's more people to speak to. Therefore, you get more speaking, more communication, right? That was the theory. And I tried to look at some studies to see if there's any proof for this. And I could only find stuff from the 90s and the next decade. And it was from Enron, who aren't usually like, the cool people to quote for studies. But they did a study where they moved Office from cubicles to open plan. And they looked at how many emails and instant messages was sent before and afterwards. And it went up. So like, aha, therefore face-to-face conversation has diminished. But it's an assumption, yeah? So it'd be really nice if there was a way to track this sort of thing. And thankfully, the people at MIT created the Socio Badge. This little device here gets hung around your neck, and it's got a little infrared. So if I have one, you have one on. I start talking to you, it records, we talked. It's got a microphone. It doesn't know what I said to you, but it knows we had a conversation. And also, it's got Bluetooth and things like that. But it means it's hooked into your system, so it also knows how many emails, how many IMs, and who you spoke to, right? And there's been at least 3 experiments where they've put these on during office changes to see what will happen, right? And one of the studies I'm quoting here is when they went from having cubicles to open plan. This is from 3 years ago. And what they found was after they moved to open plan, it was 73% less time spent in face-to-face interactions. So communication had fallen really far down. And there was 67% more email and instant message being sent. So communication had gone from sort of the high bandwidth face-to-face into being replaced with emails and instant messages. because people don't want to interrupt people and for other reasons. So communication, yeah. There's no evidence proving that there's only evidence I can find that proves it reduces communication. So let's look at collaboration. Cool, so collaboration is working together to complete a goal, right? Not just talking about it, but actually working together to finish that thing. And obviously, we've taken a dent here because we can't talk as much anymore, which is going to be a major hamstring to trying to progress on collaboration. And for this one, I found another study by Matthew Davis. He looked at over 100 different workplace studies and tried to pick out anything to do with creativity, what things actually work better. And one of the things he said did definitely work better in an open plan was a symbolic sense of organizational mission, which means, look at all these people doing the same thing as me. Isn't that amazing? And you don't get that so much if they're hidden away in a room. Fair enough, right? But what it did hurt was attention spans, crucially creative thinking, which is part of collaboration, and general satisfaction. Other things they found was more than 60% people wear headphones in an open plan environment, right? So they're not be able to communicate. They're trying to drown out the rest of the noise, which means it's harder to collaborate with someone who won't listen to you. Also, there's an anxiety around trying to look busy. They don't want to look like they're not doing anything in an open plan, which means if someone's busy, you're less likely to speak to them. And also, hot desking has an effect here. So if you've got a team and they're spread out, the further away someone is, the less likely you are to speak to them. I have a test for this to see if you may suffer from this or not. And it's a test of your working environment. And it's like, if you have to have an impromptu meeting, like you suddenly find out something and you want to talk to the team about it, could be something that changes plans and things. Can you do it where you are? Or would you normally have to book a meeting room and go away and discuss it there? Because if you can't have it there, then it's slowing down conversation, and some chats might not happen at all. So collaboration, no, I don't think we're going to give them that one, given the lack of communication and it's hard to speak to people. So next up is equality. They have a very interesting definition of equality when you look into it, and that is about removing the hierarchy of officers, which is to say us and them between management and employees. It wants to remove that. And to be fair, it did. It has done this. By moving the managers into where the teams are, it has created better ability to have discourse compared to what it was before. But when I started searching for other things to do with equality, some other things came up which I thought were very interesting and probably more likely to be what we think of when we say equality. So this study from Anglia University started talking about people feeling exposed in certain situations. For example, they had some bad news or felt emotional. So if you're in the middle of a sea of deaths and you had some bad news, and you want to have a cry, you're going to feel very exposed doing it. And this came out during the Me Too movement. So all these other people started saying, well, this is my experience, and this is my experience. And I found some ones that really illuminated this for me. So this one's from Lauren, which I'll let you read. So yeah, so by having open offices here, we're basically making leering very easy to be done. And it's forcing at least this lady to then take alternative routes and not be thinking about her work. Another one from Veronica here, saying basically she's feeling watched all the time. So she's trying to keep good posture the entire time. Again, not thinking about your work. And this one was anonymous. They were saying they felt so self-conscious about their clothing, which is something we even saw in that report from the 70s there, that they're not thinking about their work again. And this seems to be a particular problem. And last year, you might have seen Netflix actually put in a rule saying they are banning employees from looking at each other for more than 5 seconds, which is, I suppose, is one way to try and combat this problem, right? I think they also banned people asking for their phone numbers, things like that. But yeah, this is a real problem we have. And I actually had one of my reports tell me that they had a problem with this particular issue. And it was someone that kept sitting in the hot desks in the middle of a T junction, right? So they could see all the way down different corridors. And they just watch people going all the way. And they told me about it. I was like, oh, damn, what can I do? The person was quite high level, so I couldn't do too much. But I did get a chance to change the floor plan. So I moved the hot desk to face a wall over there, which managed to at least move the problem somewhere different. But hey, maybe our environment is encouraging this sort of behavior. So equality, I'm going to give it, yeah, equality if you mean managers and the labor if you want, but not really if you want to look at the whole picture. So health. Like we saw, like the Action Office was all about, can we improve blood flow? And the good news is, it's true. Yes. So it's much healthier than sitting isolated all day. In fact, there has been some studies from occupational environment medicine which found you move 20 to 32% more in an open plan office compared to your own, because you got to go up and go places, I suppose. And they say if you move more, you're less likely to be stressed. So that's a good thing. However, there was also some studies in Denmark from the Ministry of Employment. And they asked all the people, and they had thousands of people in the study, how many days do you take ill? How many people are in your office? And they found that when you got more than 6 people, you take 62% more days leave for medical sickness than anyone else. So I think it goes from below 5 to just over 8 days a year. And the NHS actually had to look into this because people got lots of press in the UK. So the NHS had to talk about the veracity of how well they've done this study. And they were like, this bit seems true. But they had a bit of speculation in there in Denmark, and they're like, this is speculation, so it needs further study. So they were saying a higher noise can be an effect. You're more likely to be exposed to viruses if you're hot desking and it's not been cleaned in between use. And lack of privacy can introduce problems with sickness. And also, if they can't change their environment, like it's all fixed furniture, then that can lead to higher levels of stress. So health, yeah, physically you'll be a bit better, but you're going to get ill. So let's give it 50-50. And then finally, the one which is probably most obvious, which is cost, which is real estate is a cost that you can reduce. I got to say this, you got me on this one, yeah. Yeah, it definitely is cheaper to pack people into a space, more people into a space. And I was looking at the average space per employee, and it's really gone down. It started going down really fast around 2007, 2008, when the financial crisis hit us. Because that was one way to reduce cost, which is on the balance sheet, is just remove land costs. And I remember one place I was, there was a densification project, which I loved the word of, where they were trying to move everything together. It's the only time I've ever heard that term. So yes, you can reduce cost, but I would say at what cost, right? And if you need to quantify all these other things in here in order to say that. So this is a very simple one to do, right? But you're doing it at the cost of many other things. So I thought, cool, open and shut case, yeah? Let's go to Twitter and start boasting about it. That's a great idea. So here I am. You got a lot to ask for by creating an open plan. And then my good friend Chris points out that this guy here would disagree with you. This guy here is the author of Joy Inc. He keynoted Lean Agile Scotland a few years ago. He's got a company in Michigan, about 50 people, and they work in a massive open plan and have a very unique culture. But this threw me entirely, because he started talking about culture, open culture, and he's saying the physical environment is part of that. So I guess it's not all bad. But why does it work there? So let's have a look at their office. This is their office. You'll see it's quite packed. They're very close to each other, right? You'll also notice at every table there's 2 people sitting together because they pair on everything. They pair on development, analysis, all that. This is part of their culture to work together on everything. And their stand-up is the entire company every day. All 50 of them stand around and do a big stand-up. And he's saying, look, basically you can't have that if you don't have a huge open plan in order to do it in. And just to rub salt in the wound, they let babies come in for the first year, because they can't run anywhere, right? You just put them down, and they're there if you turn back. And also they got dogs. I mean, oh. So he's proven there that open plan can work in certain situations. And one of the big enablers of this is someone called Lisa Marie Babbitt, who's talked about that place. She says, sometimes the workspace we built 10 days ago is no longer the right workspace, so we change it. Everything in there is on wheels. The electricity is like from the roof. There's no wires going under the floor or anything. And you don't have to ask anyone. If you need to move it, you move it. So those tables we saw earlier, they're close. They're probably working together. If they got annoyed, they could just push their table away because there's more space to do it. Rich Sheridan is the president of the company. He says he comes in and finds his desk moved every now and again. Ah, I was sitting here, now I'm not sitting here. And that's a very different culture than what you would normally get. And Rich says that he thinks that physical space is critical. He thinks that the space enables the cultural change. So he's saying there's a link between the physical space and the culture you have. And I thought this was very interesting, right? Because I've been focusing just on space. But he's proven that with a certain type of culture, you can make that space work very effectively. So I started doing more research. It's like, how can we, but culture is quite amorphous, so I can't really pin it down. But this person here, Jacob Morgan, has written this book last year called Employee Experience Advantage. So he's looked at 250 odd companies and decided these ones seem to be doing much better around the employee experience than these other ones. And, you know, good stats if you do that. And he's got two things in this book which I think are really interesting. The first one is the evolution of employee experience. So this is like how management has looked after their workers at different points in time. So the first one up is utility. Basically, what do you need to do your job? Laptop, latte, hammer, good. There you go. Off you go and do it. Cool, that's what's done. And then you've got productivity. This is your bad guy coming back here, Frederick Windows Taylor, who went around with a stopwatch behind workers' backs going, da-da-da-da. Oh, it took you 32 seconds to send that email. If you shave 5 seconds off next time, yeah? Oh, good, good. Stuff like that, where we're trying to cram as many people in and get as much efficiency. People be damned. Now then we go into an engagement, where we've been for at least 20 years now. This is, you know, when we have surveys. Are you happy at work? Are you very happy? How can we make you happier? And the survey comes out, and people are kind of happy, and then it goes down if you're, in most cases, right? So what do people do? They usually then give them some small perk, is what he points out. So I don't know, they're unhappy, give them fruit bowls. Great, yes, you have fruit bowls. And then the stats go up a bit because people have got free stuff. Good, eh? But then next year, what happens when you do a survey again? It's gone down again. Yeah, and it's like you continue doing these small things. Like, did you forget to put the avocados in a fruit bowl? What's happening here? Yeah. But he's saying that, okay, so this is where we've been, focusing on happiness too much. And he's saying, well, instead, what we should be doing is looking at experience, which is where the book focuses. And he defines experience as impacted by three things: the cultural environment, the physical environment, and the technological. So technological I haven't touched on yet, but that's, you know, the tools. Are you using very good tools and processes for doing your work? Does your video conferencing work very well? Using Google Docs, is your software, the software you use is part of how you employee experiences their workplace. The physical environment's there, could be home, could be work, but it has a big impact. But he's saying the biggest impact comes from the cultural environment. You know, how are you motivated? What's your leadership like? How do your teams interact? And this sort of tied together the idea Rich Sheridan was saying to me is that, yes, you could focus all in here, but it doesn't matter if, you know, this bit's rubbish over here. But also, there's a relationship between these things which make up the employee experience. But obviously, changing something in this domain is much more looking at how we do things than, you know, adding a fruit basket every now and again. So cool. So I was quite happy with that. That allowed it to move it all together. However, I know nearly nothing about affecting culture, so I can't talk to that. But I studied this bit, so I'll continue talking about this bit. And that's to say that I think we can do a lot better than what we've been doing already. And I'd like to give you some examples of what I think is an ideal working environment. Rather than sitting on the fence, I'll tell you how I think for collaborative knowledge work, we should set things up. And then a bit about what we can do with OpenPlan. Cool. So I think the first thing to realize is there's many different modes of work. There's at least three I'm going to touch on here. And if you're doing collaborative knowledge work, you need to work in different modes. It's not we're always sitting in a desk, we're always sitting alone, we're always sitting in a team. You move between them. It ebbs and flows throughout the day. And there's sort of three areas I would recommend for making a physical area to represent that type of mode. So the first one I kind of call the cave. This is like a tiny little enclosed office for one or two people. If you need to take that phone call where your teenage son or daughter is shouting at you, you can go in here and you can have it in there, away from the rest of the office. It's generally for concentration and privacy, so you can have your one-to-ones there. Also, if you just need to really concentrate on something and get something done, it's a space for you to go. So ideally enclosed for privacy and noise, and small and has a desk and two chairs. This example is glass here. I think it's preferable if you can hide away in it a bit, so it'd have some solid walls rather than glass. The next one up is the theatre. So this is an area where a subset of the team could get together to work on something. And this is for kind of like explicit and incidental knowledge sharing. So it could be they're working on similar cards, so it's a story, so it's worth being around to share chat. You might be swarming on something, or even like mob programming, where multiple people work on one thing at a time. So this, again, would be an enclosed area with a large desk, seats for 8. And this is where you can do your sort of presentations inside the team. Again, it's enclosed, so there's no noise, so you can say what you want in there. And outside of that, I would put a lounge, which is a place just for relaxing and socializing. This is where you can have your hot desks, any informal work. People can come see your team there, and make it nice. Throw some sofas in there, throw some coffee machines in there. And those are the 3 bits of work I generally see happening when you're doing knowledge work. Some bits on your own, usually stuff with the team, and then a bit where you can take breaks. And I think breaks are important, not to pick when you get tired, but to prevent you from getting tired. You should regularly take breaks during the day, and you need to have a nice area to go and do that. So bring that together. So if you're a team of 8, I generally drove for about 2 of the caves, bits where you can do work alone, like over there. 1 theatre, a bit for the subset of the team, and a lounge outside. And if I had more teams, then I'd start adding more around them, especially if they're related, and maybe extend the lounge. But I think that caters for the different types of work. And you can say this theatre bit here is kind of open plan, right? But you've only got the 8 people inside your team in there. So it's not you're getting all this noise from you don't need to listen to from outside. It's just the people that are working on the same thing as you. And here's some examples of this setup being put in action. The one on the left is Spotify in New York. They've got these sort of areas here they can work together in a lounge outside. And the second one is STX Next in Poland, who have written quite a lot about how they changed their work environment to have an enclosed team room. But what if you can't change walls? What if you can't add any of these things? What can we do to fix our open plans? So I think the first thing you want to fix is we're trying to get to the same point where we have the same opportunities, a place to work together, a place to work alone, a place for chats. So the first thing you need to do is kind of like improve the noise and privacy. There's a few ways to do this. You can get acoustic soundboards like this. But again, this is what the Bürolandschaft people were thinking about. How can you work together but then have some isolated sound barriers? Of course, in order to do this, you need to start removing some banks of desk. So that means you need to have buy-ins to reduce the amount of seating in an area. And you can also use plants as a wall. And there's another thing called pink noise, which is like background noise. I spoke to someone who worked somewhere that had a waterfall in the middle of the building. And he found it really good because it just blanks out all the other noise around you. You can hear people near you, but not anywhere further. I did actually look it up. There is an ISO standard for open plan noise detection. So if you want to be very particular about this, there is an ISO standard that you can refer to. And it talks all about what pink noise is in there. You may have seen some of these already, but they're pretty good. Little pod things you can get. You can just place them in places. They allow solo work. They're like sound insulated, so you can't really hear the outside and no one can hear you. So good for privacy. This, again, is kind of like that cave thing. You can make an area for 2 people to work. And the most important thing, thinking back to the Menlo experiment there, is really you want to use adaptable furniture. Stuff that is on wheels. Because like I say, like whatever you build, usually we build it for like 2 years or something. But teams change. So if you move things on wheels, make it so anyone can move stuff, then you can make it a lot easier for people to adapt as their needs change. Those dividers, acoustic walls, for example, again, you can just pick up and move them, not like an actual physical wall. Another problem tends to be wires, like wires going under, and network points tends to be an issue in buildings. So, there's alternatives you can have when they're in the air and you move it about. It doesn't look as nice, I suppose, but it's a lot safer. But again, you might say, okay, that's good, but I can't remove space. We're really stuck here. The head count's really high. I suppose it depends where you are, whether you can afford that. So London and Hong Kong are the most expensive place for real estate. But one of the places I worked in London did a redesign of their office, and they took into account some of these things and tried to make it work well for them. And here's a little video of what they did.
The idea behind the design of ThoughtWorks was to create an inviting space which reflects the role of nature of ThoughtWorks and also supports the way in which they need to work. The back of house space has got lots of alternative work settings, from desk-based positions, focus spaces and buying booths, standing high tables, closed 2 and 3 person meeting rooms, games room, and then not forgetting the community or the central hub space, which really combines as a seminar space, but play space with a ping pong table, and also acts as a working environment as well.
Cool. So you'll notice even there, like all these tables are still on caster legs and everything. And what I would say is, do not put a ping pong table near wherever people are working. That is really annoying. If you're trying to sit there and you debug something that's gone wrong and someone's playing ping pong with you, that's really distracting. The other bits they had in an enclosed room, you can see they took it over and made it into an actual table in the end. But that's a good example where you do have compressed space, very expensive rent, but they've managed to make it so you can still reconfigure it while having some spare rooms in order to do other activities. Cool. So I've got some advice depending on what level you are in your organization about what you could do next if you wanted to do something about this. So if you're like an organization's leader or a department leader, what you could do is try to get in some cultural anthropologists. These are people like UX people who just work inside your org, looking at how people interact and then report back. And it's a good chance to get some diversity in there as well, so you can avoid some of the other trappings we've seen with OpenPlan. And the second thing is, like, you have to really realize that whereas it's very simple to see the cost of the space you're renting, there's many other costs that happen with that. So it isn't always best to try and, sardine things in. And I usually try to make friends with whoever is the building manager. I go up to them smiling, and they get this horrible look on their face, like something bad's going to happen, because they know I'm going to ask for something. They won't be able to say it. And every time I speak to them, which company I go to, it's always like, the occupancy of this floor is 50, and I've been asked how can I fit another 20 people in here. And they're trying to figure out, what they're going to do, who they're going to annoy the most, reduce their space to try and do it. So we need to get away, I think, from trying to pack as many people in a room as possible. Otherwise, we can't create these environments easily. If you're a team leader, you can try and ask to redesign your area. Sometimes this naturally comes up when things are moving around. But yeah, see if you can add in some sound barriers and create like a more private space for your team. Another trick I've used is just to steal a room. Sometimes there's a floor no one likes going to. It's got rooms. Move your entire team there and see if you can recreate the space I was talking about. And finally, for individuals, try and influence your leaders. Don't just whinge like I would. Instead, offer solutions. There's some really good examples online, and I'll link to them at the end, where people have said, we did this, and here's what we tried. Okay? And if that still doesn't work, then you can always buy one of these. It'll offer you total tranquility. So that's all I have to say, really. Apart from, we need to start moving for thinking about things as office space to employee space. What can we do in the areas where we are? Because it's a really important thing. You're going to spend a third of your life in an office. That's 90,000 hours, yeah? So we should try to make it as best for our job as possible. Because if you tolerate this, your children will be next. Thank you.